Second, Northwest Voices in 2024. Always like to thank the LCC Foundation, Longview Library Foundation, and the Friends of the Longview Public Library. We're very excited to have Wolk with us here tonight. He's the author of the Eisner Award-winning Understanding Fox, as well as his most recent book, All of the Marvels, which I really recommend if you haven't read it yet. It's playful and inventive and passionate. Whether you're a veteran reader or somebody newer to comics like myself. So with that, welcome to this one.
Thank you so much for having me. Come on in, have a seat. If you want to go one slide ahead. So that's the book, All the Marvels, and All the Marvels has a theme song. This is my book about reading all 27,000 Marvel superhero comics from 1961 onward and trying to fit it together into a single narrative that has a bizarre history of the last 60 or so years of American culture. But it does have a theme song, and it's a theme song that is to the tune of an strange song. I'm skipping my door box up the stairway with my storage space. Stanley appeared and got right up in my face. He said, "How you can believe it?" I said, "Smile, get me gone. If you presented it, I read it. You got nothing but the song." He said, "Oh, of course I do, Fendi. Let me have a look." I said, "What did you know? I read through every Marvel superhero book. I read every one, Stan. I read every one, Stan. Age mostly fun, Stan. Shared with my son, Stan. Comes by the ton, Stan. I read every one." Again, fortunately, like looking at his face, and I think just give him the cage. You need Spider-Man to be arranged with possible ground. Reach on the sleeve. Spider-Man dance something to you, Stan. I read every one, Stan. I read every one, Stan. Age mostly fun, Stan. Shared with my son, Stan. Comes by the ton, Stan. I read every one. I read straight to World Spencer. I heard the brain damage events, two dark script shots, paper kills, like I word event, some kills, cookies, and fire star blade, now we can make that man last days. I read every one, Stan. I read every one, Stan. Age mostly fun, Stan. Cheered with the sun, Stan. Comes by the ton, Stan. I read every one. Everybody goes to next capping universe, strings and first figure, blood, blood, for you, and then they would say, Hercules, Prince Power, PS4, ASD, Wonder Man, giant size band, big honor, every one, Stan. I ran every one, Stan. It was mostly fun, Stan. Shared with my son, Stan. Talked by the sun, Stan. I read every one. I read about it, hot shots, my like after my pronounce Rob Pros, Rocket Raccoon, Marvel now, one Deadpool, two Sue Dorval, Carlos Captain Marvel, and Carol 450, Love, Fantastic 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I read every one, Stan. I read every one, Stan. It was mostly fun, Stan. Shared with my son, Stan. Comes by the sun, Stan. I read every one. And everyone, I read every one. Slide. In lieu of doing an actual book, wants to see somebody read the book. This is going to be a little talk and slideshow about the history of the Marvel Universe in 5 objects. I was asking people earlier what 5 objects we got at least one correct answer. This is a story that's been going on for over 6 years now, and so of course, as in the story, there are certain objects that appear in some form again and tell us something about what kind of story it is. Anybody want to identify these? Shout out. All fire. Dark, yeah.
The shield, family for the shield. Ages of shield.
Close.
And I can't remember the name of the gate. X-Men.
That's a control gate, and then there is. Oh,
Dr. Doom Smash.
yeah, next. Next slide. Thank you. Yes, this is the time platform. It is an actual working time machine. It was invented in college by Victor Von Doom. I did a new podcast about him, Voice of Area. And its characteristics are that it is a space and time machine, not just a time machine, because any time machine is also a space machine. It has a chronoton protection field. Although that hasn't always been used by people who don't know how to use it. It's basically a thing that keeps you from sort of like changing your existence by traveling through time. And it gives off von Neumann radiation, which is very noisy, very messy, so you can identify what's used. Now, the first time it appeared on Earth chronologically in the Earth's chronology was around 100 million years ago during the Cretaceous period when the dinosaur on the right fought Godzilla. On the left, yes, Godzilla is part of our universe. It was identified here as 900 million years ago. Maybe that's when our universe Cretaceous was. Now, as it happens, Doom, along with them, recently found themselves in the Cretaceous period, also via time form, if it recently means anything in the context of that. But Doom explained that there's not actually much danger of changing the present through time travel through past, but because, as he put it, if you want to do that, you have to kill a lot of butterflies. They did run into a venomized dinosaur in the Cretaceous, so lots of dinosaurs found out. Now, the next oldest appearance of the time platform was the year 2940 BC, when the Fantastic Four were there in the presence of the awesome round King of Kings, or the Seven Seas. And then the West Coast Avengers, when they were traveling through time, well, actually, Doctor Strange was also traveling through time in some future, some other way, that ended up in the Word Round at exactly the same moment. And in fact, after that, the West Coast Avengers were traveling through time and also ended up in the room with around time or around next at the same moment, which is why nobody saw each other. And in fact, at the same time, behind the wall, there was this guy called Apocalypse who was around in Egypt. So he was also not quite next to the room where it happened at the same time. Apocalypse, we're going to keep an eye on that guy because we're going to see more of him. Now, the question is, the obvious question is, well, Rama-Tut can travel through time, and Doom can travel through time. And so could they actually be the same person? And this is a possibility that's raised very early on, and they're having a discussion about it. And this question is eventually answered categorically. No, actually, they're not very different people. Although Rama-Tut is the same person as King the Conqueror, believe it or not. The time platform is also taken by the Thing from the Fantastic Four to the year 130 BC, so that his friend, the sculptor Legion Masters, could meet that Alexander's time. But unfortunately, he got into a fight with Hercules and accidentally broke the arms off against Nemesis. That's how that happened. The time platform was also taken by Doom with Iron Man to the Arthurian era, where Doom met his sometime girlfriend, Morgan Fay. And it was taken in 1348 or 1348 by the Avengers, because they just wanted to go see the Black Lady for some reason. And it was hijacked by Cotton Mather, yes, that Cotton Mather, to take the Scarlet Witch, one Maximoff, to 1692 for the Salem witch trials. And of course, in its first printed appearance, the time platform was used by Dr. Doom himself to send the Fantastic Four to the 18th century to retrieve some jewels that may or may not have been infinity gems, in the course of which the Thing became the historical Blackbeard pirate. I will never get over that. In the year 2099, it will be used for Doom to meet himself, kind of. It was also used to take the Thing in Captain America's the early 2000s to meet the original Guardians of the Galaxy, who were the ones who were around in the 31st century and inspired the 20th or 21st century versions, because causality works a little bit different in comics than it does anything else. So what does the time platform mean in the context of a Marvel story? It means that time is fluid for the purposes of the story. I talked a little about the way that Marvel has 3 or 4 different chronologies. There's the order in which the story is published. It's kind of boring. There's the one in which the events of the story happen, which is different. And in a different way, there's also a way in which each character experiences those events, which can be different from the order in which they happen, because time travel. And most importantly, there is the order in which you, as a reader, experience it. For the purposes of reading, you have a time machine. Why not use it? For the purposes of reading, you also have a universe time machine. Why not use it? There are people who are like, yeah, I want to read Marvel comics, but I want to read them all in order. No, you don't. No. You have a time machine. Use your time machine. So the second object is the dark one, which is a peculiarly evil Turned out just a couple years ago in Doctor Strange, the Multiverse of Madness, we saw that movie. It is a book, a collection of spells, written down by the elder god Thon, or Shton. He is the god of chaos, and his magic makes things more chaotic. Yes. And it's called the Dark Hole because it was written in a cave inside of one mountain known as the Dark Hole, spelled ARQE for reasons. It's described here as the first book, which is overstating things. Initially, it was just scrolls, and in fact, decorative leather-bound books were not invented until around the year 400 AD. But the power of the Dark Hole is that it can make werewolves and vampires and zombies and other things that the comics were used to from the 1950s to 1970s or later in the case of zombies. That's a whole other thing. The pages of it are indestructible. They can be separated, but they can't be destroyed. And early cult of mystics in Atlantis tried to use it to take over the world, but they also used it to make vampires, which killed them. The Dark Hole also turned up in England in the 6th century, where Modred the mystic here tried to use it, as you can see, that didn't go well for him. And Modred is not to be confused with Mordred the mystic, whose contemporary Morgan the Fae, his girlfriend, founded a new cult around it in Arthurian times, which didn't go well for them either. Anyway, it's kept turning up in unexpected places like a pre-Babylonian tomb in the 1920s, which is how Carnage got mixed up with it, long story. And in the trunk that was opened in the 1950s by Jimmy Woo, who was an agent of Atlas, making Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., we have seen in the Ant-Man movies, like WandaVision. And then at some point after that, it fell into the hands of a guy named Gregory Russoff, who just by reading it activated the curse and became a werewolf, and passed that curse on to his son, who turned into a werewolf by touching it. The Dark Hole pretty much corrupts anyone who touches it, in fact. So Doctor Strange, who's the version of the comics, figured out he had to read it from a distance. It's clever, because it also included a spell called the Montesi formula, which could destroy all vampires. Which he did, and the only one that spared was a guy named Hamlet King, who decided when he became a vampire that he would never bite humans instead of his blood mix and stuff, that's okay. Unfortunately, Doctor Strange screwed up because it's instead of one of his brother. So a few years later, vampires came back, and now the Montesi formula doesn't work anymore. Oh, well. Later on, this guy here started showing up and offering people individual pages for Dark Hole, which could get them out of whatever camp they were in at the cost of their soul. Very Twin Peaks there. Twin Peaks. And of course, it was falling into the hands of poor Wanda Maximoff. But she's not the only one. There's a mysterious woman called Mother Righteous who not only studied Dark Hole, as we see in that lower panel, but apparently read bedtime stories to Wanda's twin semi-imaginary children, Billy and Tommy, WandaVision, who later turned out to be real in some sense and started the adventures, and Billy and the American Prince who landed the Korean swell empires without a whole other story. Now, what this says is that from the Dark Hole comes monsters, but that's not quite true. What comes from it is transformations. The Marvel story started out being about monsters. Marvel line was a line of monster comics, mostly before this superhero line. But the Marvel story is full of people who have been transformed one way or another against their will, or find themselves with powers they never asked for. What comes from the Dark Hole is transformations. And transformations are all over this story. Heroes, villains, mutants. The change comes to you. And the question the Marvel story keeps asking is what you want to do with it. And sometimes you don't get a choice about that. That's what the Dark Hole does. Now, our third object is the shield of Imhotep. You see here, this would be kind of familiar because it's the ancestor of a few other shields. Now, in our world, Imhotep was chancellor to the pharaoh Djoser in the 22nd century BCE. In the Marvel world, he was a pharaoh himself, and it was at that time that the earth was invaded by the Brood, who were a bunch of really nasty aliens of the like alien type alien, like lay their eggs in you and split you open. And Imhotep beat back the Brood, and either he formed a group called the Brotherhood of the Shield, or had them name themselves to his honor. Accounts differ. Now, he didn't do it alone. He did it as part of an alliance with Moon Knight, who was the earthly avatar of the Egyptian god Khonshu, and Apocalypse, who met a little while ago, spying on the conversation for Chromatown. But the organization has persisted in some form ever since. It has had some famous members too. Leonardo da Vinci, who you see here, was an Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And so were Sir Isaac Newton and Michelangelo and Galileo. And so, in fact, was Benjamin Franklin, who's wearing his Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. pin here. Ben Franklin actually had lots of contact with present day superheroes. Like there was the time that he had an affair with Doctor Strange's girlfriend, Clea, that was time traveling. And much later, Ben Franklin's goes into Deadpool's house for a while. But also, when Ben Franklin met Captain America, who was time traveling at the time too, as you do, Ben Franklin was so impressed by his costume shield, he suggested it to Betsy Ross as a design reference for the American flag she was working on. So we get this amazing editing on the panel of Captain America first in the state saying, "This is possible, it's just as possible I've been ripped off by Benjamin Franklin." Now, Captain America is famously affiliated with S.H.I.E.L.D. organization and also famously has a whose best configurations, including by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was made by a metallurgist named Dr. Myron McLean, who was trying to create the metal adamantine, not adamantium, but adamantine, which is what the golden mace of Hercules was made of. An alloy that Dr. McLean created, which is now known as proto-adamantine. This immediately is combined with a sample of Wakandan vibranium, and somehow Dr. McLean got the idea to cast it in the form of a perfectly round shield. Belonged to the brotherhood of the shield no one's fine. But what the shield of Imhotep and all of its offspring tell us in the context of the moral story is that there is a force that protects us from and defends us against monstrosities and catastrophes, and that force is science and knowledge. All the most interesting characters in the first decade of our history are scientists, although the most interesting characters are still are also scientists, they are mathematicians, they are knowledge keepers. That's what that's from. So now, here's our fourth item, the ultimate nullifier. Correctly identified. So the ultimate nullifier here was created by the Watchers. You may know what if, but it was created as a perfect instrument of war. The ultimate nullifier. It doesn't look too impressive, but it first shows up at the climax of the original Galactus story. It's a very, very famous story from 1966. And Watcher basically gives it to the Fantastic Four. Now he can't interfere with anything. So it's like, so I can't really help you if you know somebody's doing right here. It's the ultimate nullifier. And the Watcher basically gives it to them, and this godlike being called Galactus, who's come to the Earth, recoils in horror from it, saying it could destroy everything. What are you thinking? Although Galacta, the daughter of Galactus, much later points out that Galactus very kindly mentioned the safety was still on. And then after its first appearance, it doesn't show up for another 16 years. This is a what if comic story from 1982, where a guy called Horvath, that name Horvath, gets hold of it, and in his passion to bring order to the universe, he uses the ultimate nullifier, and all becomes nothing. This negative space here belongs to Eternity, who is within the Marvel story a reification of the entire universe. If one can say that there can be a reification of the entire universe. There's actually a sequel to the story in which the entire universe is annihilated. Well, some entities who are outside the universe of time come back, and the ghost of Eternity is like, yeah, well, maybe I don't want them back. It's the most nihilistic thing I've ever seen in comic book about it. So about a decade later, the ultimate nullifier turns up another story with the same writer, and Mark Wolk, and Quasar here tries to use it to nullify the Magus, bad guy of the week, but ends up accidentally nullifying himself, as you do. A bit later, Reed Richards uses it to nullify another known being called Praxis, and effectively destroys the universe and then rebuilds it. Now, the universe has been completely destroyed and then reconstructed exactly as it was a number of times in Marvel's story. Marvel has never repeated. They've never said, okay, everything before this didn't happen. But there have been times where like we have eradicated everything from existence and then just brought back. At one point that happened twice within about a year and a half and $2 billion stories. They keep unplugging it and just plugging it back in basically. Also around this time, the ultimate nullifier was briefly stolen by the Justice League of America. long story. But then a funny thing happened. People started taking the ultimate nullifier kind of lightly. Spider-Man actually ends up setting it off in this particular story. This is a story from the Marvel Adventures line, which is for younger readers and set in its own universe. And he explains, well, it's not the ultimate annihilator, it just kind of changes probability. And then the ultimate nullifier starts to turn up everywhere. Sometimes it's in alternate universe stories like this one, as something that a future version of Peter Quill, Star Wars, is trying to get its hands on. And then it's a thing that Space Punisher, because there's Space Punisher, because of course there's Space Punisher, uses to take revenge on the Watchers, and then finds out that it is a hoax, quote, one of our many tools to confuse and control. There's a different version of the Punisher who becomes bonded with the ultimate nullifier, Fraction Helicarrier. Matt Fraction, who wrote the Hawkeye series of years ago, said, yeah, there are two things that everybody tries to do the first time they write for Marvel, and those are you have to crash a helicarrier, and Spider-Man has to be there. Everyone tries to do that. So there's a crash helicarrier that has the ultimate nullifier Punisher on it. Back in the main Marvel universe, main timelines, Spider-Man runs into it again, just falling in a bunch of stuff that was still with the Thieves Guild. And it turns out in a briefcase in Florida, with Chibi and Fury here in Florida now, the very ultimate nullifier, very best there is. And for some reason, Duke has the ultimate nullifier sitting on his desk along with a six-pack that's got Devil Dinosaur, the Dinosaur, Godzilla on its packaging. I mean, by this point, you can get an ultimate nullifier for roughly the price of a slab copy of Wolverine #1. And in fact, my friend Brian, who hosts the podcast One by the Month, has an ultimate nullifier hanging on his wall in case of emergencies. And yes, that is towards the calendar narrating next to it. Which is not to say that it's not still a threat. Dr. Doom, again, recently got a hold of one in his semi-traditional briefcase, labeled in case of quarterback. We're back again. And when Doom was recently visiting another universe where there was a version of himself who was an actual hero, he was so incensed by that that he used the ultimate nullifier to destroy that entire universe. That was like. So, what do we know about the Marvel story from the ultimate nullifier? Well, as the nullifier first appeared, it was the product of the era of mutual assured destruction, the kind of instant annihilation that we once thought was likely to come for us at any time. The abrupt end of the Marvel story or the abrupt end of all stories. But the Marvel story is novel. It is no longer even the kind of story that can end. This thing that we once thought could destroy us would never even get us. Annihilation is still a genuine threat. It's still frightening. And it's maybe even more omnipresent now than it ever was. We feel about it now. Finally, our fifth object is also the most recent one. This is a Cohen gate. These first appeared about 4.5 years ago. In a set of comics that, as I was mentioning in this class earlier, I'm kind of obsessed with. This is the X-Men comics from the last 4.5 years. It's wonderful stuff. So these Cohen gates are grown from seeds, and they allow mutants to pass instantly from wherever they are to Krakoa, which is the mutant nation that they've established on an island in the middle of the ocean. And this came about at the same time as mutants declared self-determination and became a major and economic and political force in the world. So they now have a system that can take them anywhere. And the first time that mutant passes through the Krakoan gate, they also learn the Krakoan language. The language is alphabet was designed by a guy named Tom Miller, who has designed the logo of all the X-Men comics that are running right now, and just absolutely regular design. But only mutants or people accompanied by mutants can pass through the gates. And even then, as it notes here, they have to ask permission for non-mutants to use the gate. And notably, Kate Pride here, who has all the allegiance mutant, breaks her nose when she has to go through it. He's the only one who gets blocked, though. Even if you want very badly to be mutant, even if you do the coolest thing in the world to please be a mutant, like the children we have here, if you try to pass through the zone gate, you don't go anywhere beyond where you started. You're just on the other side of the arch of plant life. So here's a map of where the gates are all over the world. there's a lot of them, and the archipelago comes in two parts. There's an Atlantic and Pacific archipelago. And they're not only in the world. There's one that goes to other world, which is the magical territory that occupies the same space as the British Isles, but is magical instead for reasons. Here's one in the summer house where Cyclops and his extended family lived on the moon for a while, right near where Potter used to live. There's quite a few in outer space, including this one, which is on Chandelar, the throne world of the Shi'ar Empire. You've seen Kree, you've seen Skrulls, and you haven't seen Shi'ar yet, but they're the other major empire in the sort of outer universe. They are very much like the Roman Empire, except they're also kind of birds. It's a thing. Plus, of course, there was one that was planted very early on Mars, which led to humans terraforming and settling Mars, and Mars becoming the capital of the solar system under mutant rule. And that's how things worked until very recently, when the anti-mutant organization Orcus managed to hack the gates so they didn't work anymore as part of their big plan to exterminate us altogether and make PR games with it. And what the Krakoan gates mean in the context of the Marvel story is a couple of things. One of those things is that there are worlds beyond the one we know. The human existence is only the beginning of the story. The quotidian existence, the way that we experience it in this world, there are ways to experience it that are beyond that. And that the Marvel story itself offers passageways to unimaginable places for those who are willing to be part of it. But the gates are also very much political instruments. And another part of the meaning is that this story, the story of these 27,000 plus comic books, is always a political story. When comics get so political, superhero comics have always been political. The stories are always somehow about power relations, and it always reflects what those power relations are within our world and how quickly they can change. So those are our 5 objects, but I actually have one more object I would like to mention, which is all of Marvel's itself, which apparently not only exists within the Marvel universe in some form, but is on Doctor Strange's bookshelf in the final issue of the Defenders miniseries, next to some really remarkable books like All the These Words and Music, really just a huge high compliment to be there. Even better, it turned up in Thor number 24 last year, being read by Loki's friend Verity Willis here. And Verity Willis has power. Her superpower is that she instantly sees blue lies, so she can't bear to read fiction. So the fact that she's engrossed in my book is a very, very high compliment. Thank you so much. I am happy to try to answer whatever questions you got about this, about the book itself, about the comics, whatever you got. Yeah.
What was your first impression that created your interest in this particular subject?
What was my first impression? How did I start reading Marvel story?
What piqued your interest? Like, oh, that's something I want to know about, do with, whatever.
So the question of what started my interest, catch my interest. So there's a few different things. What started my interest is when I was 9 years old, I stayed with my grandparents in upstate New York and ventured down to the newsstand to pick up a paper and comic books in that term, and I really liked it, and I wanted to find out what happened next. And next month, I went and I bought the next issue. There's another comic that had that character, and so I'll get that to another one. Interesting, so I got that also. And then about a month after that, I discovered that right near my house in downtown East Lansing, Michigan, there was a store that sold nothing but comic books, and they got it once a week. And then I was a goner. And after I've been going there for about 2 years, pretty much every week, like, okay, the title Spiritus can each needs to register, okay? And as far as the Marvel story went, there's a kid across the street in Wolk. And I got the DC comics, which were presenting the world as basically orderly and salvageable place. And he got the Marvel comics, which were weird and wild and violent and dark, and I wasn't sure I liked them, but I kept reading them, so I would even let my comics go out and miniature. And he would read his comics, Daredevil, Moon Knight. What is this? I like this. What does that say about me? And then I think the first one I actually bought was talk about this a little bit in the book. X-Men number 138. Now, X-Men number 137 is a very, very famous issue. It's massively important. Everything changes here. I came to the issue after that, which is 22 pages of a recap of everything that had happened in the previous 137 issues. For a certain kind of spicy brain like mine, this was. And then there's another one, and what kept me going? Well, you know, as I got a little older, and the superhero stuff, it's not quite doing it for me so much anymore. It's like, I think a month went by, like I did one or two, but I like graphic novels. Comics, one has a stable spine, one has a square spine, it's a chronology. But I was a bit of a snob. And then in the 2000s, like, there started being more things that's really interesting to me in the superhero stuff. And I kept learning that. And then the thing changed everything again. This mentioned the book. When my son was about 10 years old, he and I had always read comics together. But not superheroes, it's superheroes that my dad likes. He'll always target. But then I was giving a talk about the history of American superhero comics for local community organization, and I put together a PowerPoint. It's like, is it PowerPoint, Dad? Sure. Wow, this is a complicated system. I like complicated systems. Hey, Dad, can you read all the Marvel comics together? Sure. Like, we'll have a nice week. But we'll have a nice week together. 2 months later, he read everything from 1962 up to 1968. He was like, "Man, I think I'm more interested in the Marvel crossover era." It's like, "All right, we can start doing work." And he's in the first year of college now, but he came home from the break. Can we read some of these stuff together? I was like, absolutely can. That kept me.
So when did was the earliest one in 1962, or did it go, when did it all start? When did all of it start? I haven't read this book yet.
So the company that became Marvel started publishing comics in 1939. What is generally thought of as the Marvel period, it didn't use the first comic they ever published was called Marvel Comics #1. It changed its title to Marvel Mystery Comics with #2. The company itself was not called Marvel Comics until 1960. Where this is generally thought of as starting, and where my official starting point for this book initially was 1961, when the first issue of Fantastic Four by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee came out. Because that's before that, superhero comics had been really out of fashion since the end of World War II. In 1950, Captain America had changed its title. Captain America's Weird Tales in a horror comic. And then last 2 more issues, we're just going to be a horror comic. But in 1961, the superhero stuff gets reduced, and I thought that's going to be my starting point. But I'm going to do a little bit before that, and then I realized there's a point 2 months before that that's a better starting place. And that point is the publication of Linda Carter Student Nurse #1. Linda Carter Student Nurse is what it sounds like. It is a comedy with a little bit of romance about a student nurse. It didn't last very long, it's 11 issues, but Marvel at that time, besides the Monster Comics, was publishing a bunch of comics about teenage girls and young professionals. Million Model, Buffy the Teenage Tornado, and the thing that became Marvel's hallmark and later became the MCU's hallmark, which is that it all happens in the same place and characters from one story can show up in another. Happens the same month as Fantastic Four #2, but it wasn't in superhero comics. It was Linda Carter Student Nurse meeting the Million Model, meeting Patsy Walker, America's sweetheart, friend Katie, meeting Kathy the Teenage Tornado. They all appeared in each other's comics, and there were consequences for each other's comics. But it's like, also, Linda Carter Student Nurse #1 was the first comic to have a logo that said MC on its cover. Nobody knows if it stands for Marvel Comics because they weren't using that name yet. But that's the logo. It's the first one to have its first issue without a logo. It's like, what if this entire story were actually a story about, the student nurse? And it kind of is. In the early 1970s, all of a sudden there's a comic called Night Nurse. And it's Linda Gardner. It's a night nurse, at a hospital night nurse lasted 4 days. Then in the early 2000s, when Marvel was no longer been publishing anything except superhero comics, we discovered that there's a woman whose name we find out is Linda, who runs a secret medical clinic for superheroes who need to do line of duty for them to get patched up and questions asked. They call it Night Nurse. Room on the right. What if this is her story? We love thinking about that. So that's my long-winded answer to that question. You can bring it up.
I was wondering if you're still reading all of them up.
I usually get asked, are you do all of these scenes yet? I'm not reading all. If somebody wants me to do it, I'll take a couple of years and I might go back and forth. I read, the X-Men books all of you. Those, like, I read my best friend every week when they come out. And there's like 10 or 12 of those a month. I've been reading Venom right now, of all things. It's actually really interesting. Really formally invented, which is not something I would expect in Venom comics to be, but it is. I'm reading some Midnight stuff. And there's stuff like, this could get to later. I'm not in the age of it.
Authors, how many different authors created these comics throughout the years? How many different?
That's a good question. So I have a whole rant that I said earlier today about how comics writers are not the same things authors. There's, and I can go off on that tangent too, but for the first 8 or 10 years of Marvel, it's really just like 9 people in a room. It is Stan Lee doing all the scripts, or most of them. His brother Larry wrote a few. Other people try for 1 or 2 but can't get the tone right. By 1966, a guy named Wolk comes in. A couple of years later, Danny O'Neill and Gary Freeman come in. And then there's a lot. And sometimes the story is a gigantic collaboration across decades. Sometimes people in the same room, some people who are continents and ways apart from each other, but they're all building on each other's stuff. They're all making it so it all tries. Either all fits together or it tries really hard to fit together. And there's this wonderful message, which is the Marvel Chronology Project, which makes it its business to figure out the individual chronology of every character who's ever been seen in these stories. And there's a lot of really talmudic reasoning that goes into this. Because you'll occasionally find something that contradicts something else. My absolute favorite example, when I was reading some early stuff with my son Sterling, we got to a point where basically like story A has to happen before story B has to happen before story C has to happen before story A. How are we going to reconcile this? Well, let's see, people on the internet have said it. We look it up, we find a few different explanations. And so it's like, this is the explanation I like, which is that Daredevil thinks he's wearing his new suit for the first time in this story, but he's actually wearing his new suit for the first time in this other story, but doesn't realize it because he's blind. Great, that makes sense to you.
Well, I heard that when you talk about story, what you said about Jack Kirby, Stanley, rather than by Stanley and Jack Kirby, you like to think of it that way?
I like to switch their names back and forth. So for those of you who don't know the way that Stanley and Company made comics in the 60s, it is not the way that people think of making comics very often, which is that one person writes a script and the other person draws what is in the script. forgive me, we were the last one there, let's feel that this. The way that me and Kirby and Ditko and then other collaborators started working was what they ended up calling the Marvel method, which is that the plot either you come up with a plot first and explain it to whoever was drawing the story, or your Ditko or whoever, and act out with them. Or you would have a conference with them and talk about what they would do, or you would just give them a line like, okay, I want to see this character come back next month. Or later on, with both Kirby and Ditko, just leave the whole thing to them. They would come up with a plot, they would draw the story, and then they would hand it to him, and he would add the dialogue and captions. Now, as far as Stanley was concerned, since he was writing the dialogue and captions, that's right. Was the writer. As far as Jack Kirby was concerned, since he was coming up with the characters and the plot and staging it and drawing it and figuring out what happened in the story, he was the writer. They both believed fully that they were the writer of the story. And they eventually worked this out by their stories. It didn't say written by Stanley, drawn by Jack Kirby. It would say a Stanley Jack Kirby production. And that was how they showed their credit. And that method of doing things like, okay, who's the writer? They both are, or one of these. But it's an interesting dynamic, and there are some writers and some artists who very much prefer to work plot out of script. There are some who very much prefer not to, depending on your perspective. It either gives artists incredible freedom to pace and stage and then come up with what the story is going to look like, or it means that they are doing work that somebody else is going to pay for. So yeah, lots of ways we have it. So there are Jack Kirby partisans, there are Stan Lee partisans, they are both very strong flag bearers. It's take great pains to avoid microphone. Lee was a fantastically gifted maker of comics. There's this incredible interview with John Romita, that I quote the book, where John Romita drew Spider-Man. He was writing for years. He's a con man. Everybody knows that, but he didn't deliver. A con man who delivers the goods. That is exactly what Stanley was.
Well, so you mentioned John Romita, and in the book you quoted Romita as saying that he would happily have Stan think above his all the time because of Stan, what he did for the Marvel Universe. But can you talk a little about what John Romita did for the Marvel Universe? Because he's strong history in drawing romance comics. And he gave that sensibility to Spider-Man and what I think, like I love Ditko stuff, but really, I jumped on after Ditko got the book as a kid. And I think we talked about Romita and romance and comic books. Yeah,
we were talking about Donor.com, completely obsessed with romance comics in the late 60s and early 70s. They're fascinating, they're beautiful. They are stories that were made for tween girls by mostly middle-aged Jews. About stuff that tween girls were really concerned about, like big cultural generational shifts. What do we do about feminism? What do we do about culture? What if I fall for and these are concerns that had been part of romance comics, which incidentally were invented by Jack Kirby and his partner Simon in 1948. And romance comics were the biggest genre of comics in the early 50s, for a couple of years. They were big, and as late as the 70s, there were even 15, 16 million a month, and now they're gone. By the end of the 70s, they're gone. But Romita came up through romance comics. He'd done war comics, he'd done all sorts of things, but romance comics were his forte. And Steve Ditko, who would draw Spider-Man stories, Ditko has a lot of gifts in drawing physically attractive people who do not love. He drew like 2 romance stories after, there's a reason for that. But when Ramita came in and when we started plotting the stories, it was all of a sudden Peter Parker got blew up. And all of a sudden, like, what's going on with his love life became a big part of Spider-Man and salesman. The Nico stuff is the basis for all the Spider-Man that came after it. But then Romita comes in and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is cool. And Romita became the art director of Marvel for quite a few years. He worked in the office, he had an art team over his readers. He mentored a lot of artists, and he had this very strong, beautiful graphic design sensibility, and it didn't look like the work of scrappy outsider artist anymore. It looked like a fantasy.
Do you consider like the movies and the TV shows as part of this Marvel story, or is it like a separate thing from the comics?
Oh, it's definitely separate. I love that the MCU feels no obligation to be faithful to the source material. It just takes the little bits of it that work as film, which is not comics. The comics are drawn, comics have some hand involved, the comics are individual, still pregnant moments. And don't hear different. I'm saying that's really like there is no WandaVision comic. WandaVision is a TV show that is formally about being a half-hour situation comic. But it draws on some bits and pieces of things. And it's a different story actually. So the convention in comics is that each universe has its own number. The main Marvel story is universe 616. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is Earth 1.
Or like I grew up watching like the X-Men cartoon and the Spider-Man cartoon from the 90s too. And I think that's my intrigue initially in time.
Yeah. There's actually a comic series that ran a couple years ago, and it's back to New which is set in the world of the X-Men animated version from the 90s, X-Men 97. And there's in fact, so the big comics X-Men story from 5 years ago is called House of X. There is a version of that story that adapts it to the mode and style and tone of the 90s animated cartoon that was called House of XCII. Thank you all so much for coming. It's been a treat. I am trying to get more second one.
What is the time?